In a world where indie animation is dominated by lore tunes, if you ignore this, that, and this, one college grad dares to dream of the impossible. An adult animated sitcom.
Hey ChatGPT, what's the biggest country in the world?
Hey Robbie, super excited to answer your question. Just give me a second to do some calculations. Russia is the largest country by size, but India is the biggest by population.
Nice.
Is this supposed to make me not want to kill myself?
Chimptopia is the current punching bag of the internet. The concept for an indie show that's set to launch its Kickstarter soon, which probably isn't the greatest idea at this point because, controversy aside, it's clear that this needs some more time to cook in the oven. Which is why I want this to be less of a Chimptopia bad video and more of an examination, something that provides constructive criticism while also going over why slice of life cartoons are so much harder to get noticed in the indie scene than those of deepest lore and serialization. But there still will be a smidge of Chimptopia bad because what is this? To give you the rundown, an artist who's fresh out of college, Robbie, started developing an idea a couple years back that he decided to pull the trigger on making only a month after graduation, following the misadventures of three deadbeat friends who want to make money by any means necessary, getting into all sorts of hijinks along the way, sort of like an adult animated Ed, Edd n Eddy. It's not the craziest pitch we've seen from the indie scene, but hey, I like shows about dudes just hanging out, and to Robbie's credit, the main trio appears to be in their 20s, which is different from most mainstream adult animated sitcoms where the ensemble is either grown-ass adults in the 30s or 40s, or a family consisting of the parents and their kids. Maybe a talking animal if you're lucky. But despite not being totally unique, this doesn't sound like the worst thing in the world. So why is everyone dunking on it? Because the teaser Robbie made for Chimptopia gave people the worst first impression possible. The exact opposite response Robbie was probably expecting. You see, everyone's been a bit of a negative Nancy when it comes to indie animation as of late, tearing just about every new project apart, with Gameoverse bearing the brunt of the criticisms, especially this scene with Gobbles.
I know you're dealing with a lot, but I'm here. We're here. Together. There's still so much we can do. You're too hard on yourself, kid. None of this is your fault. None of anything you ever did is your fault.
It's kinda cringe.
You had people wanting to burn little homie at the stake over some corny dialogue. So, in what I feel like was likely capitalizing on the hate train, Robbie did what any starving artist wanting eyes on their project would do. Make a Tex Avery parody where cartoon Robbie guides a knockoff of Gobbles to his demise, with the whole point of the short being that lore tunes are oversaturating the indie scene, and who wants to watch Gameoverse anyways? Don't answer that, but instead of attracting people who hate Gameoverse, this turned almost everyone against Chimptopia. People didn't register this as a lighthearted parody, which Robbie apparently intended. They just saw some smuck trying to assert that his cartoon is what the masses really want to see. And regardless of intent, in spite of the fact that these characters are supposed to be mean-spirited, I can't blame anyone for being soured on this and viewing the creator himself as someone who's bitter, especially when the premise just comes off as inherently hypocritical. Dunking on Gameoverse for being another lore tune when adult animated sitcoms have been the status quo in entertainment for years, trying to make Gameoverse come across as lazy for an abundance of video game references, when this short in itself is a reference. The only people who are going to get enjoyment out of this are those who hate Gameoverse, hate Glitch, hate anything that has the same appeal as the big lore cartoons of the 2010s, and just want to see Gobbles getting jumped because it's the only way they'll get some twisted sense of catharsis from being miserable and hating any indie cartoon for not appealing to their niche. So the internet did what it does best: rip Chimptopia to shreds and roast the creator. One bone people have to pick with it is that the art style feels pretty generic, like an evil bargain bin Ed's world. And while I'm not a fan of it, I do actually want to be brave and say, I do think there's a point for why it looks like this. Browsing through the creator's art, it's clear that he's capable of drawing pretty good and can adapt to a variety of styles. So I think he went with the simplistic art style because it'll be easier to animate, and thus, episodes won't take eons to make. That said, when you're punching up and taking a swing at the big dogs, you're either gonna need a more distinct art style than this, or more distinct character designs. Another point of contention are the characters. They're just kinda nothing so far. Like, they're clearly based off Robbie and his pals, but it's to the point where they feel like those background characters you'd see in shows that are clearly based off crew and their friends, which can work if the art style has enough sauce, as seen with JG Quintel and Close Enough. Not only is Josh clearly Quintel's self-insert, but he's also just a refined version of a background character from regular show that's based off JG. If it wasn't for the fact you can take one look at this style and go, regular show? Most of the characters in Close Enough would probably be considered generic, which just hammers in how important a distinct visual identity is. Beyond designs though, these bios don't inspire much confidence. Robbie is a joyous optimist. You sure about that? He likes working out, pasta, and cartoons, but hates being dirty and getting touched.
Okay.
These just feel like fun facts and not defining traits. He likes the gym, so is he more of a musclehead? If he hates being dirty and getting touched, is he someone whose OCD tendencies is a big part of his character? Like Double D or Death the Kid? It doesn't really seem like it, but leaning into either of those would make a more interesting character. I'd love to watch a lunk who's a neat freak in and out of the gym. That sounds like a fun combination. Hell, if he was an OCD-coded character, that paved the way for some interesting stories where that gets in the way of him and his friends securing the bag. Nolan is the short, angry one who sucks at being a ladies' man, and he likes women and hates everything. And gluten. Does gluten not qualify as everything? Honestly, he's pretty straightforward and thus seems like the most realized character of the three. I don't really have any notes. And then there's Waffles, the man of reason. Except for when he beat the shit out of Gobbles. Oh my dinosaur cock! The straight man who hates stupidity and wasted time.
Oh yeah, me too.
He's the one who's got adulthood figured out the most, and thus, it looks like the other two are dragging him down with them. Ooh, the drama. I can smell the emotional two-part falling out already. There is also their landlord, Chimp, who's rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, as he's so far the brownest character in the show, and the only one who's a monkey. Couple this with the fact that Robbie had a mock-up of Nick Fuentes merch in his portfolio before getting called out on it, and you have people reasonably reaching the conclusion that Chimptopia feels a little spiritually conservative. Now, Robbie's addressed the backlash and has given out explanations for everything in this whole debacle, leading with an animatic where Toon Robbie is, getting lynched by Bizarro Gobbles, as he apologizes for causing such an uproar.
I love animation, and especially indie work.
Now, I don't think I need to point out that portraying yourself getting hung and whipped when people are throwing racist allegations your way isn't really a 4D chess move. It's yet another thing that feels like it isn't reading the room and is very short-sighted if you want to give him the benefit of the doubt, which I am. And I'll be honest, the reveals that Bobbles was the one giving him the work made me chuckle. Still, you could have made this Toon Robbie chained up and getting shit thrown at him like Patrick and the Smoking Peanut, and not a federal hate crime. Robbie also clarified that this was supposed to be a friendly jab, that the Chimptopia cast are exaggerated versions of themselves, and that there's no ill will towards Glitch, and that he was unaware of how controversial Fuentes is, that the merch design was part of a test for an internship that he dropped out of after the final interview where he learned more about Fuentes' views and opinions, and he only kept this up on his portfolio to fill it out, and that Fuentes doesn't reflect his own political views. A lot of people are calling bullshit on this, and it's obvious why anyone would be turned off by seeing this, lacking any desire to support it further. While it does make me side-eye the whole project, I want to be charitable and point out that it really isn't uncommon for controversial companies and figures to be as vague as possible about their motives when courting new talent because they know it'll be harder to draw people in otherwise. With how Chimptopia seems to be drawing influence from Robbie's real life, and the premise being three friends trying to make some cash by any means possible, it tracks that the real Robbie would be blindly rushing into as many opportunities as possible in the hopes of landing something, not doing proper research on what he's getting into, and not really taking into account what kind of outlets would be making shirts with the slogan, America First.
Do you draw minorities? Oh well. Heil.
Finally, Robbie stated that Chimp is based off of one of his Hispanic friends and that he didn't intend any racism, being Puerto Rican himself. Which, even with this explanation, is still crazy because, from the outside looking in, this cartoon is about three dudes living in what looks like a regular American town, but it's called Chimptopia, with the only brown character aside from the protagonist being a landlord monkey. Coming out during a time where races feel more empowered than ever, and we just had a streamer terrorizing minorities and saying they're chimping out when they have any sort of emotional reaction to the slur-singing slasher harassing them. With or without the Fuentes art in his portfolio, the show is just a bad look all around. I do want to believe in Robbie when he says he doesn't support bigoted viewpoints, because frankly, it'd be easier for him to double down and get some of that conservative cash flow. They'd fund anything that's a finger to the shows they call woke. Him denouncing that does mean something in my opinion, especially because denouncing them usually invites harassment and isolates their support entirely. It also doesn't help that, from what we've seen, the show's just not that funny. It's inspired by Seinfeld, Smiling Friends, and South Park, yet doesn't seem to understand why those shows are hilarious. All I've seen so far is shock value without a real punchline, and a rehash of Randy using ChatGPT to share his annoyance without the dynamic, timing, context, or punchline that made that moment funny. Granted, the latter was an animation test that wasn't meant to fully represent the show's writing. With all that said, can Chimptopia be salvaged? Robbie seems to be taking all of this on the chin and is listening to the feedback, reworking the Kickstarter and the show itself, even updating the character designs, which I do think is an improvement, but it doesn't necessarily feel like a massive glow up. It's largely just more appealing hairstyles. They're all a lot more spiky, and their poses and expressions fit their personalities a lot more, but I still think they're just too, normal. Even with these designs, I feel like they're trying to maintain a simple anime art style, which is completely understandable, being an indie project and all. But that's where I think the designs need to be more fun and less humanish, like Smiling Friends. Save for Mr. Boss, on account of having more detail, a lot more specific features, and being an actual human, none of the gang is really all that complicated to draw. They're largely fun shapes with limbs. Alan's wearing literally nothing but a tie, yet that's what makes his design memorable. Slice of life shows struggle to stand out way more than serialized shows online because they don't have that hook of mystery and an overarching story, things to invest in alongside the characters. When you only have the characters and the scenarios they get into, every single aspect needs to be as strong as possible, from the characters themselves to the designs to the writing, because at that point, if you're shooting for success, you're not just making an indie cartoon, you're making a funny online video that anyone can watch and would want to share with their friends. That's why so far it feels like Chimptopia just doesn't have the sauce. A popular idea online that I honestly think would be a great change is to make the whole cast chimps so that the name makes sense and doesn't feel like a dog whistle. I think the world in general needs some revision. Again, they're inspired by Smiling Friends, but that has a very distinct world that isn't just nonsense. There are humans, but it's mostly populated by critters. It helps the show stand out because instead of characters being average Joes, they're colorful, wacky creatures with a fun, specific premise that enables them to explore this world through a variety of batshit insane adventures. I think Robbie needs to figure out this world, make more of the characters talking animals, maybe workshop a new name, and I think we'd already be off to a much better start. I also think the premise itself is just missing something. If this is about the boys trying to get a payday, there's a really fun chance to make this show about our modern hustle culture, with every episode exploring the gang screwing up different jobs. Exaggerated versions of Uber, or selling food right out of your home like how people do on Facebook Marketplace. What insane supernatural product could the boys start dropshipping, corrupting the world even further in pursuit of a bag? Like, could you imagine them selling something along the lines of a one-wish willow in bulk? I think there are ways to take all those situations and elevate it into absolute mayhem. And since this is a comedy above all else, with no hint of lore or an overarching story, I think they really need to do what most indie productions are lacking in and hire a writer. Someone seasoned with a good sense of humor. Otherwise, we might be stuck with these concepts of a joke instead of actual bangers. Writing dialogue is hard. It's been the biggest hurdle with my own projects, and a reason why we haven't pulled the trigger on anything, because if the writing sucks, that could be all she wrote, and I think more indie projects could benefit from having a writer help clarify their voice. If we have no qualms of hiring other artists, why do we get so precious with the writing? You guys know a buttload of animation writers are out of work and would probably love to work on an indie project, right? Just some food for thought for anyone watching. Making an indie cartoon right out of college sounds like a Herculean task. I know people want to be like Craig McCracken, Alex Hirsch, or Rebecca Sugar, people who got a cartoon either right out of college or a few years after college, only having a couple of animation jobs before helming a project of their own. But frankly, I don't think that's something to be idolized. Look guys, I've been doing videos for 10 years. I went from a teenager to a grown-ass man yapping about animation. And if I've gotten any wisdom to share of age, it's that the task of managing a whole team to bring your story to life is either going to require you to wait for your frontal lobe to finish developing, or the involvement of people with experience who know what they're doing. Hell, everyone's been glazing Kane Parsons lately, but despite having the sole director credit for Backrooms, he had a bunch of industry veterans help him out because when it came to an entire theatrical film, he was out of his depth. And the result was something pretty great. I know that's not what people want to hear. People want to be able to dive into their project in their late teens or early 20s and wow the world with something they made all on their own. And while that's definitely possible, some help with those with experience will go a much longer way than relying solely on your skills or only the skills of people who have honed their craft in school but haven't gotten much industry experience. I don't know what the future holds for Chimptopia, if the Kickstarter will be a success or if Robbie will push it back entirely or move on to a different show. I just hope Bro stops rushing into things because that's clearly what's been getting him into trouble, the impulse to make something happen ASAP, and that's sort of antithetical to the animation process as a whole. But as always, these are just my thoughts and holy shit, Scott the Laws!